the Assad regime is almost on the brink of collapse. His allies, such as Iranians, are officially leaving the country, or at least they've said to leave the country. While Assad says he is still in Damascus, but there was a private plane flying out of Damascus just a couple hours before. As many might know, a lot of developments have happened in Syria after many years of basically almost a frozen conflict, but not much has been happening. So this has been a surprise for many. So we'll do some. At first, we'll do some basic overview for those who don't know about who are the parties of the Syrian civil war, how it started, and sort of how do we get here. We'll try to keep it brief, and then we'll go to what has happened the last week, and then we'll do sort of a evaluation. We'll look at what might happen in the future and also what this means. Joining me today is Alex. It's great for you to join me for this. Welcome to the Daily Objective. And so I'll just do a quick sort of overview. So Bashar al-Assad, he assumed the presidency in the year 2000 as the 19th president of Syria. Um, he was Syria had basically since and even before had basically sham elections. When the election happened, he was the only candidate. They had to lower the age of presidency so he could become a president, and also he was elected with like 97 support. So in all sense, he is just another dictator in Middle East, as many before. What happened in 2010, as well as all across the Middle East, you had the Arab Spring. Syria was part of that. It was basically a bunch of anti-government protests all across the Middle East. Syria was part of that. So it eventually it was getting the protests were getting bigger and bigger. And then I think officially it said in the middle of 2012, it was said that that's when the sort of the Syrian civil war started, but you had protests and like outright sort of action against the government even before that. And so since then, you had the ISIS in 2013, then you had Turkey joining in 2016. You had at some point or sort of ISIS war was wiped out for the most part, I think around in 2019. And and also at some point you had the Turkey also invading part of the Kurdish territory uh, also in 2019. And after that, for the most part, for about 5 years, nothing has happened. Alex, anything to add?
Yeah, so I would say even further. I mean, Bashar al-Assad is the son of Hafez al-Assad, who, and they have a very they have a very they don't have a very firm grip on the people because well, they have a firm grip on the people because it's a dictatorship, but really because of the ethnic lines that that Syria falls under. The Alawites, they're a religious minority in Syria, well, in major parts of the Levant. They probably are around 8% of Syria. And so what Hafez al-Assad decided to do was to basically install Alawites, who are infidels, by the way, and not just infidels the same way Jews are infidels, like because Jews are the people of the book. They're infidels because they're idol worshippers, right? But so they're not Muslims, which is obviously a big problem. So he installed the Alawites as part of like the senior members of the military. And it was through a military coup that he was then able to resume kind of control over Syria, because they have a person who's, where your ethnic identity, your ethnic tribal allegiance is going to dictate almost all parts of your life. In a place like Syria, even in a sham election, right? You're not going to be able to get much support if you have. So that's a really important thing to, I think, remember. And so there is very little legitimacy for Bashar al-Assad as a person, besides the fact that he's a disgusting, vile dictator. But that shouldn't, that shouldn't necessarily, that wouldn't necessarily have had such a, public civil war, right? So that really has led to it, I think. It's been a real serious contributing factor, is that they, as in the various groups, all of the various groups cannot be led by an idol worshiper, right? By an infidel.
Okay, so now let's go into where are we now? So I
Mm.
took a bunch of pictures. So there is you can look up Syrian live war map and you can find sort of like a general overview. So I believe, I think this picture is from about 2 weeks ago, and this is how it basically looked for about 5 years, from my understanding. Just a simple explanation: the red is the Assad's regime, the sort of yellow orange are the sort of the Kurds. They are not necessarily that only Kurds are there. They are basically a bunch of forces going against the Assad regime, but they are led by the Kurdish are the biggest, sort of the biggest minority, you could say. So they are Kurdish led. You have the blue is the Golan Heights, which is oftentimes showed because as many might know, it used to belong to Syria. Then you had the black pockets are supposedly just some remnants of the ISIS, and then you have the green, which are the rebels or basically the Turkish supported rebels, and this sort of like bluish green are the different rebels, basically the Islamists, and we'll talk about them. Alex, anything to add before I go to how it looks now?
Yeah, go ahead. Let's
So this is how it looks now. And again, the last picture, this was the status quo for about 5 years. And now in about a week, it went from this. And I think even this is outdated. Like I took this picture like earlier today, and I think it's already outdated because if you look up at, I believe, Homs here, it's the rebels
Mhm.
are saying that they've already entered it. So they are inside. And I think similarly, Damascus, they are getting really close. So and we've also seen the Kurdish rebels expanded. So pretty much, for the most part, really, Assad's regime seems to be falling apart. It is basically on the brink of they barely are holding on to anything. The also the big thing that happened is a lot of this was not even necessarily conquered. A lot of this they've simply left. They've abandoned a lot of the cities. The reasoning was we do not want to risk the life of civilians. So that was the supposed reason why they pulled out, is they didn't want to risk the lives of the civilians. So I mean, Alex, what do you think about this advancement? I mean, in just about 7 days or well, more a week and a half or so, that's a pretty big, pretty fast.
Yeah, but you also have to remember is that there's been this massive vacuum of power that's been left from Hezbollah not being there and the Russians not being there. And the Syrian army, they're not really like gonna fight very well because they're not incentivized to they've been dying for like wage increases, which Bashar al-Assad just announced I think it was a few days ago, guys, I'll give you those wage increases by 50%. It's like a bit late. So they're not incentivized to fight. And many actually just took off their uniforms and just put on the jihadi uniforms because it's better to be in the strong horse in this race. Um but listen, all of the people who are fighting here, they're all bad guys, right? All of them. None of them are good. They're all bad. This is something that I really think is a big, big problem that Israelis and Americans they seem to have is they seem to think, yeah, the enemy of my enemy is going to be my friend, right? And they sponsor and they support these groups. Um, and I think that that's just a huge, huge, huge mistake. It always has been a huge mistake. even the Kurdish forces, right? The many of the Kurdish forces, they put the Americans like rebranded the PKK and put the word democratic in their faction and thought, oh, it'll just change all, who they are. Right, the PKK are responsible for killing 50,000 Turkish people. They would recruit, children. They would recruit and for suicide bombing campaigns. These are all bad guys. Even the HTS, who seem to be getting a really great kind of
The
remodeling in the Western
moderate
reform,
jihadists.
moderate jihadists. Yes, so if you're not familiar with the personnel, then you wouldn't know that, hey, yeah, these are all just the former senior commandant of ISIS, of Al Qaeda. You can change the name, right? And say, oh, I've distanced myself. But that's actually the reason that makes me feel that that's exactly what Al Qaeda used to do. They were very, very good at that, at getting various different groups to come, and they would repackage them and remarket them, um, to say, hey, this is and also because the only reason that like Bashar al-Assad, besides all of the foreign support, right? The only reason that they would have been able to hold on to those areas is because if all of the rebels, right, had gotten together and fought like they were unified, then they wouldn't have been able to, right? So that's something as well that Al Qaeda was always really good at doing, was always really good at rebranding, basically. And we can even see, like, there have been a whole bunch of Al Qaeda leaders who have gone to Turkey, over the last few years. So it makes me feel like they have some state support, maybe from Western, right, governments as well.
Yeah, so you mentioned HTS, which stands for Hayat Tahrir al-Sham.
Hmm.
That's really great name. And
Yeah.
as you mentioned, they were aligned with Al Qaeda, and sort of, I've heard apparently, really, one thing I've heard is that COVID changed them. Apparently, during the COVID era, they were like handing out masks. They were like really helping the people and sort of like trying to help. And it really does seem that they've sort of right now it seems like they've accepted sort of the pragmatic way out, that basically, if they if and we'll talk about what might be the outcome of this, but if they will be let's say the new government, they need to like appeal to the sort of
Hmm.
the Western powers. They need the support, and sort of apparently something that was also surprising is that when they this is where we are, but this is surprising that basically when they
Hmm.
took over the cities, they didn't like pillage and completely destroy them. They like told the soldiers that no, don't go crazy, just be calm to the civilians, don't immediately execute the prisoners of war, and sort of like trying to take the pragmatic way out. And so just do a bunch of news because about what happened today. So what do we have here? So as I mentioned earlier, Iran is set to evacuate officials from Syria. So basically, when it comes to the sponsors of Assad's regime, Iran and Russia were the biggest ones, and it looks like Iran has pretty much accepted that this is not going the way they would want and are pretty much pulling out, as well as Hezbollah, of course, has been a big supporter of Assad's regime. That's where they've been able to get support for the support for Hezbollah has been going through Syria this whole time. So even there, you could see sort of like Israeli pragmatic interest, like, oh, we can shut down Hezbollah if we just help the
Mm.
rebels. Um,
Yeah. Which is
uh,
exactly like kind of what gave us Hezbollah, because we said, oh, hang on a minute, if we just, go ahead and we just befriend these, Shia militias, they'll be able to hold off the Sunni militias in Lebanon, and that's how we actually got to Hezbollah.
yeah, so this is pretty much what's happening, and also I'll show one I think pretty interesting video about and now where did I put it? Oh, so this is from today, I believe. Alex, you might have seen it already. Okay, so this was video from, I believe it was from today. It's from a neighborhood in Damascus, where the rebels are not there yet, but you've already seen. So the statue that was toppled, it wasn't, I believe it wasn't a statue of Bashar al-Assad, but of his father. And I think I looked up, maybe you know better, but the flag they've been waving, it looks like a flag for the Druze, so for the Druze. So. At least that's what I've seen, and that's what I've seen also people saying, which
Oh, I'm surprised. I didn't. The druze is like a whole bunch of different colors and like stripes.
yeah. So it was a five strap. I looked it up, and I also
Ah, okay. So
seen
yeah, so
people.
that is the druze. I didn't see that. That is the
Uh,
druze then.
yeah, and you know, sort of like pulling down a statue that's, you know, it's always symbolic. But I've seen a similar pulling down of statue in different countries, specifically in the Middle East,
Hmm.
and it didn't really go in the way we would want. And I think this is sort of when it comes to, you know, I think Donald Trump has commented on the situation in Syria and said America should not be involved in Syria at all, which, you know, the more I look at it, the more it might seem like that is almost the only sensible option. Because again, you might say that, you know, Assad's regime is obviously horrible, and that supporting the rebels might bring us something better. But you know, well, first of all, you have so many factions that already, which also not don't necessarily love each other. You have to realize that even when Assad regime, let's say Assad's regime's fully like collapses, the Turkish-backed rebels don't really like
The
the
Kurds.
Islamists, the Islamists, and neither of those groups, not a big fans of the Kurdish forces in the
Hmm.
northeast. So yeah, I mean, Alex, what do you think? What do you think will I feel like we will see the end of Assad's regime, but and you know, I don't want to do almost like a Russian line of like, well, Assad regime is bad, but at least they provide stability or some stuff like that. Like Assad's regime, like obviously has no legitimacy, but you know, what will we get? What do you think we'll get from this if it really falls?
Well, I mean, I would be, I don't know if they're gonna. Well, yeah, for sure. I think that the problem with countries that were formed by the British and the French once they let go of their empires, they didn't really take into serious enough concern ethnic lines. So you have countries like Syria and like Iraq where you cannot solve a problem there without redrawing the map. There's just most of this tribal fights is exactly done just because of warring clans, warring tribes. Even the guy who rose to be the head of HTS, I hate saying these dumb names because I just, it's al-Nusra, Jabhat al-Nusra. Even him, they're basically a mafia, right? So he wanted to be the big don, right? And challenge Al Qaeda's leadership. But yeah, I think that it's a real shame for Syria. It's a real shame for Syrians as well, because I think that they've really suffered for the past 20 years, and they suffered way before that as well under these brutal dictatorships. But it's I'm not so sure it could be worse than the situation was last week or 2 weeks ago, where you had all of the smuggling coming in. Unless also we, remember as well that it was also very bad for Ukraine as well. They had a big strategic interest as well in Syria and in removing the Russians from Syria, not necessarily having a civil war, a new civil war. Um, so yeah, there's no good options. There's no good outcomes. You could argue about a one outcome being better or one outcome being worse, but there's no good options, right?
Yeah,
No good actors here.
yeah, that's what I've been trying to get into the Syrian civil war for some time just to sort of understand really what's going on. And when you look at, I mean, when you look into almost like any of these civil wars, I mean, look at Yemen, look at Somalia, look at Syria. It's always well, you have this like government group that is like dictatorial and really bad, but you have also these rebels which are for the most part not really that much better, and you also have ISIS here. In
Mm-hmm.
almost every single conflict of this, you almost have a ISIS there. If you like really couldn't pick out who is the worst guy here, they'll also always add ISIS there. And it really does show what how well one how much philosophy really matters and how it defines. Like if you have like a civil war in countries such as this, it is not because of like warring ideologies. It is not like you have a fight between enlightenment and mysticism or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's always a bunch of different gangs. One you might have a secular gang, and you might have a or I don't even want to call it a secular, but you might have
Yeah.
like not necessarily Islamic gang versus somewhat Islamic gang versus a different religion gang, but it's never
Mm-hmm.
it's never there's never an ideology that's really based on anything more prosperous, anything better. That's why Arabs pretty much in every country that Arab Spring happened, it wasn't like it was American Revolution type of rising up. It was just sort of they dislike what it is right now, but they didn't really have like what something to replace it. They didn't have something better to offer to the people. That's why
Yeah.
any sort of support, anytime we try to and by we I mean sort of like the Western countries, anytime we try to intervene and sort of like help one of the sides, nothing really better came out of it because there was no
Mm-hmm.
underlying philosophy that would push the people, that would push the country towards some type of liberal democracy, some type of Western style government.
Yeah, and it's also just the fact that like in Syria, you can only have populations in Syria and in Iraq that are going to be congregated around sources of water. Because this is also a big problem when it comes to your ethnic tribe. Um, is kind of the institutionalization of tribalism is because you need your tribe to be constantly dominating the Euphrates or constantly be able to dominate these things from a like you might not make it to the next day, right? And so drawing up the map again, I don't know. Yeah, it does have some chance of winning because Syria cannot recover. Because if I just don't like you, Daniel, I can actually move me and my family away from you. But if you and me are being forced to share the same well, it's just going to be me and you, and we're going to have to battle it to the death, right? That is really playing a very large role in all of this. Like you don't, there's no such thing as just being a lone person in Syria that's just gone off, right, to the wilderness to live on their own. You can have nomadic tribes and stuff, but this is a very harsh, neck of the woods.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of sort of redrawing the lines or something like that. I mean, you already you sort of have that in some places. You already have, I mean, in Iraq, you already have like the Kurdish people in the north have a certain amount of autonomy, and that's what
Hmm.
always is sort of pushed as a solution. But again,
Yeah.
I think fundamental, it's like autonomy to do what? I mean, if the only reason for the legitimacy of a certain autonomous region or a certain government is, we're just a different gang or we are a different kind of people. Again, it's always gonna put people against each other, because there's always gonna be some sort of groups that want to fight each other when you don't have a philosophy. So
Hmm.
you know
No, I
uh,
agree. I don't think that if you did that overnight, that all of a sudden that they would become like different, right? But I mean that maybe it might not have these, civil wars that last for, 10 years that kill a million people, and draw evil actors like the Russians in, because then you have evil actors like Russia and like Iran. They just see it and they think, oh, here's my chance to make this state my, my battleground to do whatever the hell I want. That's not what I mean. I mean, obviously, on a philosophical level, you would need to have an enlightenment, right? You need to also be moving the moving. It would take, I think, thousands of years, hundreds at least, okay, of education, to try to get some of these behaviors that are, learned out of the society.
Yeah, I mean, as I always say, it took us, and again, by us I mean sort of like the Western countries, or well, specifically sort of the old world Western countries like UK
Hmm.
and America. It was 100 years of progress from, let's say, don't even start with the Enlightenment, but honestly, start with Renaissance. I mean, that was sort of what all that even Renaissance was required for the Enlightenment, I think, and it was hundreds of years of progress from sort of the start to understanding the nature of rights, understanding what it requires, and I think we were able, maybe to some extent, sort of let's say, quicken the process, such as I would say maybe like uh, uh, Eastern Asian countries, Far Eastern Asian countries like Japan, like Taiwan, like South Korea, that were able to do it more quickly. And maybe something like that is possible when it comes to the Middle East. But again, it won't be possible if we, never recognize that it's a problem. I mean,
Right.
if we always look at, at every civil war in the Middle East, or at every sort of group in the in the Middle East, as we'll just support these guys because these guys are marginally better, or we need
Hmm.
to find Iran, so we'll ally Saudi Arabia,
Hmm.
or Qatar, or whatever, other dictatorship you want to pick to fight against a different kind of dictatorship. I mean,
Hmm.
unless we recognize that, well, one, Iran is the enemy and needs to be destroyed because it's directly threatening us. It has been directly threatening us for decades. Unless we recognize that, we cannot hope for any sort of. It's not like if Japanese Empire was was allowed to continue, that maybe at some point we'll see them like changing their opinion about not indoctrinating their people, not oppressing their people, not trying to take over the world. It's not something that just happens. There has to be
Yeah.
progress. There has to be something both inside and outside that allows it to happen.
Hmm. Well, then I think as well that but I do also think that um the West was very, well, specifically the Americans were pretty arrogant when it comes to Iraq, thinking we'll just repeat what we did we'll just repeat what we did with Japan. Well, no, because in Japan, that's when you were just rebuilding institutions, whereas in Iraq, you're like totally rebuilding, you're just creating them, creating institutions that never existed. And that kind of was like their frustration. Um, and then they were like, let's just have an election. And yeah, that's when you have an election and and they vote in jihadists, or they vote in whatever, whatever ethnic group you have. And then so if you're going to embark if you're going to embark on a on a mission such as Iraq, I think that you need to look at it with Middle Eastern eyes and not kind of with like, oh, well, we'll just do what we did in Japan and in Germany. I just don't know if that will ever work. I think that I imagine if unless they completely, destroy each other, which is possible, I don't think there'll be anybody living in Syria in 100 years. I just don't think I think you eventually you have to leave, right? You have to leave. And you have to go to other places like the West, because you can't you will like when the Jabhat al-Nusra, when the last time that they fought the Russians was, they imposed a siege on them, no water, no nothing, for like months and months and months. I don't even know how they're still standing to be running around. I'm really quite shocked that how did they manage to do that? Because of the nature of where Syria is, but maybe they probably had some kind of backer there. I don't know. There's no future for the Middle East because it has to be artificially held up if you don't have if you I'm talking on a civilization kind of level, unless you're like Israel, by way you can figure out how to desalinate water and properly use drip irrigation to make the desert bloom, right? Then you're just going to be a bunch of nomadic tribes, because I'm not convinced that it's possible to have a city in like the Middle East, if you're part of an ethnic group that cannot be guaranteed to be like controlling the water. Just because you really can't go off on your own and do like autonomy like the Kurds. What the Kurds have managed to pull off is like a miracle, and it's only because of the Americans have probably said to the in Iraq, right? Like if you cut them off from the source of water, we'll kill you. I just don't see it like possible, which is why, the Middle East looked the way it did before the West came in artificially like revived it.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, it's I don't want to say it's hard enough to survive in normal conditions, but the actual human survival is a hard thing. It's something that requires reason. It's something that really
Mhm.
requires sort of looking at reality and seeing what you can get out of it. And it's much harder in a desert. It's much harder when there is not much. It's not impossible. It's still able, but you still need both the use of reason in sort of, let's say, the actual world, but also in the philosophical aspects of the nature of government, how you actually set up a society. We
That's
have
why
a
Lebanon's so successful, like by comparison, right? Because Lebanon has access to the Mediterranean Sea. These places, like when you're able to build your civilization like around that, you have the chance, okay, to have those, decades and centuries um to develop basically.
we have a super chat from Jonathan, thank you so much, and a super chat from Bonnie, thank you so much. Someone in the chat said Syria will invade Israel after this. Good luck. I mean, I don't want to say I'd love to see that because I really don't want Israel to get attacked again. But I'd love to see that in the way, like, how would you expect? Like, they already got their butt kicked at least once before. Why would you expect? And that was with a bunch of other countries helping them. So I'm not sure how would you see, especially Syria in this state, where like, Syria is not even united as a country. How would you expect to actually be able to fight
Yeah.
against a different nation that is actually able to defend itself?
and get it through a gap that's like this big comparatively, right? You know what I mean? Like the Golan Heights is like this, it's like so tiny, right? Like whereas every single jihadi in the whole country, they can like race to Aleppo and then like race on forward and then like race on back. Yeah, good luck. And it's all mined, right? I mean, good luck, right? And also, I think they would probably have to get through the UN as well. I heard that Israel is helping the
Yeah.
UN in
It,
Syria to figure out like you use this thing you have in your hand. You put the bullet goes bang bang. You put that in the gun and then you point. You know, they're trying to like help the UN forces hold back.
Yeah, there is a UN cap somewhere on the border between Israel and Syria, and I believe it was attacked by either the rebel forces or by the UN cap was attacked by someone, and it was Israel helping the UN to deflect that attack. This happened. I think this happened just hours ago, so I'm not sure if you've seen the story. Uh, but yeah, I mean, so sort of we try to do our best with sort of just giving you a general overview of the situation as well as what might happen. We'll watch closely where we'll go from now. As we said, I think Assad's regime might be done for the most part, but it's important to remember that it will very likely not be the end unless maybe maybe the rebels and the jihadists can come out to an agreement, but I wouldn't hold my breath for too long. Alex, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah. No, no, I'm just wondered. I really don't know where this is gonna go. My feeling is nowhere good for anybody. Hopefully maybe this will help Ukraine tactically because they don't have to live on the borders, right? Where if the Russians are actually expelled, it might actually help them quite a bit. Um, and so that would at least be a good thing that would come out of come out of this, and also I suppose for Israel, right, disturbing the flow of weapons from Iran.
Someone in the chat said, "Imagine a united Middle East like a European Union. How strong that would be in a and a new contender in geopolitics." Well, when it comes to Europe, we needed about two world wars and about dozens of different wars until we were able to be united. So I think definitely the Middle East is on par on that. I believe that there are some organizations uniting all of Arabs,
Sure.
something some
Sure, sure.
like.
I mean, I mean, that's exactly what Bashar al-Assad's organization was all about. You know, it was Ba'athist, which is pan-Arab nationalism, and it's worked out so great. So, yeah, we love it.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
yeah,
a great
specifically with
force.
that, it already happened. You already had the United Arab Republics, which was sort of union between Egypt and Syria specifically. So you
Mhm.
can look up where that went.
Well,
Uh,
even with Saddam Hussein, you know, Saddam Hussein was also a Ba'athist, yeah. So that was also, you know, I mean, it's not just Nasser, obviously. I mean, all of them. It was such a failure everywhere. It was tried. Yeah,
yeah, and
made you miss the jihadi.
yeah, and that shows that really an underlying ideology is required to be able to set up because we've seen something like that. I mean, if you check if you check out the early years of the United States, that like those the individual states were really different from each other in a you could even compare it to the sort of the differences between the Middle Eastern nations, but there was an underlying ideology that they were united around, and they were able to sort of like keep, and even then wasn't kept because they had a civil war after, so even that wasn't like easy to keep. But when you have an when you have some underlying philosophy, some underlying ideology, you are able to accomplish that. And just just sort of doing some mumbling about, well, we all speak Arabic so we can be united, and we all love socialism so we can be also united around that, is honestly not enough. um
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Alex, for joining me today. Thank you, everybody, for watching. We'll see you tomorrow with another episode of the Daily Objective and the Reality Show Extra. Thank you again, and bye bye.